Attacks on judges and threats to defy the courts, increasing tension between the Trump administration and the US judiciary. Some believe it's a constitutional crisis. Others say the president is simply doing what he promised voters. How serious is all this and what's at stake? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. Constitutional law is usually the stuff of courtrooms and academia, but in the US it's dominating the news. What was once the preserve of legal experts is now the talk of cafes, workplaces and living rooms across the country. Since taking office, US President Donald Trump and his allies have attacked judges and the courts. A torrent of executive orders to implement his new policies has been met with a blizzard of legal action. Challenges to deportations, Elon Musk's firing of government workers and the dismantling of organisations like USAID have kept lawyers busy. Judges are in the middle, having to decide if the president's plans are legal or not. Conflict between judges and politicians is nothing new, but is what's happening now something radically different that could change how the US functions legally? Is the White House challenging the rule of law, or is Trump just fulfilling his election promises? We'll talk to our panel in a moment, but first this report from Victoria Gatenby.
A fundamental principle of the United States government is that justices and judges have the power to interpret the law, and the President and Congress must abide by their rulings. It's a concept that's endured for more than 200 years, but is now being tested by President Donald Trump. For months, members of his administration have appeared to suggest they can ignore some judicial orders. In a social media post in February, Vice President J.D. Vance stated, "Judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power." And White House advisor Elon Musk has repeatedly called for the impeachment of judges who've overruled or delayed aspects of the administration's federal budget cuts. Last week, the Supreme Court ruled the government must bring home Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador in March. He's being held in a notorious super-maximum security prison.
He is a father, a son, a brother, and a proud member of CASA and SMART Union member who has dedicated himself to make our family's American dream reality. That dream was shattered on March 12th when he was abducted and disappeared by the United States government in front of our 5-year-old child.
But the White House says it won't interfere with what El Salvador does with its own citizens and insists no court can tell the US president how to run foreign policy.
Right now, it was additional paperwork had needed to be done. That's up to El Salvador if they want to return him. That's not up to us.
There are other controversial cases too. Lawyers are fighting to stop the deportation of Palestinian-born Mohsin Madawi. He's a permanent US resident and has held a green card since 2015. He was arrested for opposing Israel's war on Gaza. So too was Turkish student Rameysa Ozturk. She was a doctoral student at Tufts University in Massachusetts, but her student visa has been revoked. Free speech is a constitutionally protected right in the US, and a judge has ordered the White House to lift its ban on the Associated Press news agency. The restriction was imposed after it refused to use the term Gulf of America in its coverage. Last year, the US Supreme Court ruled that President Trump has immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts. Some legal analysts think this may have emboldened the president to challenge and, in some cases, attack the courts. Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
So, a lot to discuss with our guests today, and joining us from Washington, D.C., we have Bruce Fein, a former US Associate Deputy Attorney General and a constitutional lawyer. In Eagleville, Tennessee, Alan Orr, Immigration Chairperson for the National Bar Association and the former President of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. And in Chicago, Greg Swenson, Chairman of Republicans Overseas UK. He is also a founding partner at the investment bank Brigg McAdam. Thank you very much, all three of you, for joining us. Bruce, let me start with you. It rather surprised me when I looked at the dates. I was there in Washington on Inauguration Day. It's still not past the 3-month mark. But whether you like the president or not, he has been very, very active. So it seems, have we any idea how many cases there are now in the system challenging the Trump administration's decisions, rulings and executive orders?
Well, there are literally hundreds, but they come up and multiply so fast like rabbits. That's probably a little bit of an understatement now. However, I do want to add to one of the comments about Mr. Trump stating he's just fulfilling his electoral promises. In the United States, elections do not determine whether you enforce the Bill of Rights or whether you enforce the Constitution. Indeed, the whole purpose of the Constitution and limits is to prevent electoral majorities from running roughshod over minorities. I was there when Richard Nixon resigned under an impeachment cloud after he had won 49 states, more than 60% of the popular vote, and 520 electoral votes out of 534. His election in 1972 over George McGovern didn't enable him to say, when the president does it, that means it's legal. So this is a totally wrong-headed thinking about Mr. Trump and just doing what he said he's going to do. You're not permitted in the United States to say you want authority to violate the Constitution, and that's what we are confronting today.
Alan, I mean, of course, we also have a situation where Republicans control both houses of Congress. Is it the case that the only pushback against Trump is coming from the courts?
Unfortunately, that is the case for right now. We are seeing some movement from congressional people, specifically on tariffs and those effects on their localities in rural states, Alabama, Tennessee, other places that are losing money through some of the tariffs and also some of the downsizing of the government who are losing benefits. So Congress may step up as our citizenry steps up and pushes them to do more things. But court is the front line of pushback. But what you've seen that you haven't seen in this country in a very long time are a lot of protests. So the American people are also standing up.
Greg, I mean, what some are saying is that the administration is not just fighting back in the courts when it's challenged. What it's doing is it's fighting the courts as though they are a political enemy. And now it seems it might actually be defying what the courts decide. That's not how it's supposed to work, is it?
Well, no, of course not. But I don't think they're fighting the judiciary in general. And surely they've won a few and lost a few at the Supreme Court level. But I think what they're fighting is the activist judges, the sort of progressive left activist judges that are stepping into cases where the president clearly has, is within the purview of the executive branch and Article 2 powers. And so when you see, local district judges and a lot of forum shopping too, I think a lot of these suits are brought and they search for a sympathetic judge. What the Supreme Court said last week when they ruled on 3 cases in favor of the administration was, essentially stay in your lane to, at the lower court level, stay in your lane and respect the judicial rules and procedures. I would hope both sides will do that. But I think ultimately a lot of these will go to the Supreme Court.
Bruce, extremist judges. I looked at the work of one academic who said so far half of the rulings that have gone against the Trump administration, half of the rulings issued by conservative judges have actually gone against the Trump administration. So it's from all sides of ideology, is it not? The judges that are ruling against the administration?
Yes, just one example, in the media. It was a conservative Trump appointee who declared that Mr. Trump could not exclude AP from the news pool because it didn't like his view of the Gulf of Mexico. Moreover, we need to recognize that the Chief Justice of the United States, understanding the threat that was being raised by the Trump administration to judges, issued an unprecedented public statement reminding the administration that if you don't like a court ruling, you appeal it. You don't clamor for impeachment and removal. That has been the understanding in the United States for over 2 centuries. The only case that was different was an early impeachment of Justice Samuel Chase, who was acquitted because it was thought simply because his views of the Sedition Act were a minority view, then he should be removed, and that idea was rejected. I'm hopeful that the administration will respect the United States Supreme Court. And we need to remember that just this last week, unanimously, all 9 justices, including the 3 appointed by Mr. Trump, stated that Mr. Abrego Garcia was illegally removed from the United States to El Salvador, and the administration was required to provide or facilitate his return to the United States. It's something the United States has refused to do at present, and there's going to be hearings regarding contempt as we speak in the next few weeks.
Alan, if we look at the type of cases involved, you've just heard Bruce mention some of them. For example, cases involving media and academic freedom, that case involving who is allowed to go into the Oval Office to film the president or travel on Air Force One. That case, of course, brought by the Associated Press. There are the cases about challenging the government cutbacks and firings, which have been spearheaded by Elon Musk's unit. And then, as Bruce came to at the end there, the immigration cases. And I know that's your expertise, they seem to be absolutely the key ones in the spotlight right now.
So I do think they're in the spotlight, but I think we need to talk about the American system a little bit and talk about the presidential power. So some things we're saying, the president can put forth things, he can promulgate laws, he can want to do things, he just has to do them the right way. And that's really the problem we have right now with this administration. They're just not using the right process and going through the right methods to reach the results they want to reach. And some of those results require going through Congress and having a law change, because that's the way our Constitution works. So the out of bounds play here is that the president just doesn't get to wish things and sign things away by executive order. Our Constitution is not an executive order. And so that's the problem and the conflict that now exists when you have novice people running a very sophisticated government who don't have an appreciation for the way things work.
Alan, just staying on the point of immigration cases, though, this case that Bruce mentioned, Mr. Abrego Garcia, the Trump administration is saying that he's a terrorist. They're saying it's a mistake that they sent him to El Salvador, but they say that he is part of a group that is recognized as a terrorist gang. Is there any proof of that?
There's no proof of that. And so let's talk about the full story, because just the small story was, in the US, immigration courts are under the Department of Justice, and so is ICE. So in 2019, when Mr. Garcia went before the immigration courts, they granted him this withholding of removal. And in 2019, President Trump was president of the United States. So it was his administration that said this individual can remain in the United States. And it was appealed, and they gave him this time frame. Now we come to a new period of time in which he resurrects an act, part of an act of this Alien Removal Act, that requires it to be a wartime. There's no wartime. And also requires due process because of our history of treating the French, the Germans, and the Japanese in this country of not having due process and remove them from the United States. So the question now becomes, because he's outside of U.S. soil, it's no longer a legal issue because the courts have directed him to bring him back. It is a political issue of, will he bring him back? And that's really where we're saying this conflict exists, because the president, who has paid $6 million to house people there, and they have also returned 8 women and 2 other men, I believe, to the United States from this facility, could facilitate bringing this individual back to the United States. And because you say someone is a gang member does not make them a gang member. They have presented not one piece of evidence showing that he's a gang member.
OK, can you pick up that point, please, for us, Greg? I mean, the president of El Salvador was in the White House earlier this week. When this first happened, we first heard that he'd been deported and it was a mistake, that president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, tweeted, "Oopsie, too late," a tweet that was shared by the US Secretary of State. And now it seems the administration and the government of Mr. Bukele seem to be passing the buck, both saying, well, it's up to the other to act. I mean, this doesn't really make sense, does it? Mr. Bukele is a very close ally of President Trump. President Trump is wielding those tariffs. Countries are terrified of the current US administration because of that. If Trump said to the El Salvador government, send this man back, they'd do it, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I imagine they would. I mean, he brought it up in the Oval Office, and I think the president of El Salvador, just had kind of a cheeky response. But President Trump has, promised in the campaign to be unorthodox and to be provocative. So, Alan brought up a good point. It is political. It is not it's not 100%, just purely procedural. And I think that, he is going to push the limits. And that's what we've seen in the last 5 or 10 years. We saw that in the Biden administration when he was ignoring the courts on the Supreme Court, in fact, on student loans, so-called student loan forgiveness, which was basically a transfer of student loan debt to the taxpayer. So, we do see presidents pushing the envelope. I think you'll see more of that from President Trump, and the courts are going to rule on it. I think we've seen some 5-4 cases where, and some,
what's a 5-4 case? Just be clear what you mean by that.
Sorry, yeah, that's when the court rules in a five judges against 4 judges decision. So in other words, it's close. It's typically 4 conservative judges. 3 liberal judges and 2 conservative judges have, in fact, on a few occasions, voted against the administration. So, but then, of course, you saw a 7-2 case where one of the liberals voted with the conservative majority. So, I think you'll see a lot of these cases where it's not necessarily 6-3. In other words, consistent with 6 conservatives and 3 liberals on the court. You'll see a lot of 7-2. You'll see a lot of 5-4. Justice Roberts has voted several times with the minority. And so, look, I think, again, the president is going to push the envelope. It's supported by the polls. Mass deportation is polling up 15 points. It's 55-40. Only 40% of Americans are against it. Mass deportations of illegal migrants with additional criminal records, that polls at 78. That's 78-16. So I think that the president is listening to the people and perhaps pushing the envelope sometimes and being a bit provocative and unorthodox. But again, that's what he promised in the campaign.
I think we should share.
I need to step in.
Go ahead, Alan. Alan, then I'll bring you in, Bruce.
Yeah. So I think if we're going to talk about the poll, then also talk about the due process that's also admitted in the poll. People agree to deporting individuals who have been through due process. They're not just saying deport individuals. The problem with the situation in El Salvador is these individuals never went before a court. Our judicial branch, the DOJ, basically said you're a criminal and removed them from the United States without ever having a hearing, without ever showing any evidence, without ever giving them a chance to refute themselves. And there now is a list of 6 and growing of individuals who should not be there because they have no affiliation, as well as 60 Minutes did a very detailed report that said that 76% of them had no criminal incidents other than entering the United States without documentation.
Okay, Bruce, you wanted to come in on that. You wanted to come in on this, but if I could just add another question, because I think this case of Mr. Abrego Garcia is important, as Greg was mentioning, because the Supreme Court has got involved, and not just in this case, but the Trump administration seems to be ignoring the courts, and in this case, ignoring the Supreme Court.
Yes, the Supreme Court decision was quite clear and unanimous. The administration was required to facilitate the return of Mr. Abrego Garcia from El Salvador. Now, the administration and Mr. Bukele can't get their story correct because in the White House, Mr. Bukele said, well, you want me to smuggle him back into the United States? You don't need to smuggle him back in if the United States is welcome with arms because he was removed from due process. Smuggling him in, he's a terrorist? There isn't any evidence that he's a terrorist. There's been due process given the United States government to provide the evidence of terrorism. It's not there. It's made up. And that's the problem that we have. In the U.S. Supreme Court, 9 justices said, you must facilitate the return of Mr. Abrego Garcia to the United States. And the United States is saying, we can't do that to the federal district court here. That's why we're going to have hearings. And the crunch is going to come next week, when Trump administration officials under oath are going to have to explain why they believe that they're dealing with a terrorist, that they know is false. I can guarantee you Mr. Trump's going to say executive privilege. We're not going to testify. You're a radical judge. We're not going to comply and go up on appeal. And that will be Article 2 against Article 3. And there no longer is going to be any wiggle room. And I need to underscore as much as I can. In the United States, elections don't get to amend the U.S. Constitution. Electoral mandates do not permit violating the Constitution. And I repeat, Mr. Nixon won a far bigger landslide than Mr. Trump. In 1972, 49 states, 60% of the vote, 520 electoral votes. It didn't make him a king. He couldn't flout due process. He couldn't abuse executive agencies. He couldn't flout subpoenas. That is what we're talking about here. And talking about Chief Justice John Roberts, when he came out being solicited to announce that you do not impeach judges because they issue an opinion you don't like. You go up on appeal and obey the Supreme Court. And with regard to Mr. Biden, it's not true that he flouted any Supreme Court decision. He went up, he lost, he complied with those orders. And it's a little bit rich to talk about forum shopping because it was the Republicans. When Biden was there, they did forum shopping in Texas 100% of the time to get sympathetic judges. All lawyers do that. It's not Republican or Democrat issue. Anyway, We're talking about the rule of law. Yeah, I just want to underscore this to your audience. If Mr. Abrego Garcia can be removed to El Salvador and we claim we can't get him back despite the illegality, he could do that to me, to you, to anybody on this program, and we're out of luck. That truly is the definition of a tyranny.
Greg, I mean, I want you to respond to that because it's not just what Bruce is saying. It's what President Trump said on Monday when he was sitting with the El Salvador president. He says we have homegrown criminals that push people into subways, that hit elderly ladies on the back of the head with a baseball bat. Absolute monsters. I'd like to include them in the group of people to get out of the country. This is dictatorship stuff, is it not?
No, I think that's a bit of an exaggeration. I think, look, the president means business. Yeah, but this president says a lot of things that are, he uses hyperbole, to say the least, and then dials back. But it's important to remember that I don't see, citizens of the United States being randomly removed because the president doesn't like them. Remember, the person we're talking about, is not exactly Father of the Year, but remember, he does not have the same rights that U.S. citizens do. He's an illegal migrant. He came to the United States in 2011. And of course, the 2019 decisions were made. Yes, there was a withholding of removal. But on the other hand, we were also reminded that he's still an illegal migrant. So, I think there's a lot of sympathy here for him. And I understand that. And that's a good thing. But, the voters right now are frustrated. We've got sanctuary cities, protecting illegal migrants against federal law. And so these are, kind of 80-20 issues that the Democrats are choosing to die on the Hill for. And I don't think that it's going to work ultimately with voters. But in the meantime,
let's let Alan in. Greg, let's let Alan in there because you've been speaking for some time. Yeah. Alan, your response.
So I don't think that it's a 2080 issue because due process is a constitutional right, and 100% of Americans agree on that. So that's not something there's an argument about due process and should someone have a fair day in court. That's the foundation of our country. The fact that he might not be a model citizen, many people are not, but that's not how our system operates. There aren't levels of justice depending on who you are, what you look like, what you come from, and what your backgrounds are. That's not even Christian in the way that we sort of present that as a country to sort of model someone after that. So due process isn't afforded to you because of you being a model citizen. It's afforded to you because you're here in the Constitution. And all immigrants have that. The most conservative judge in the history of the Supreme Court said, even undocumented individuals have due process before leaving this country. So we should remember that and not allow someone to sort of say that you are less of a human just because you're not documented in this country. I don't think that's fair, and that's not what the Constitution stands for.
Okay, Bruce, I want to just move it on quickly, if I can. Trump's suggestion that he's going to impeach judges, particularly aiming up to the Washington, D.C. Judge James Boasberg. And I was reading James Boasberg has powerful friends in D.C. I think a lot of people in the legal world know each other, but he is very good friends and was a classmate of the Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. He also worked at a law firm with another Supreme Court Justice, Neil Gorsuch. Do you think when this gets to the Supreme Court level, and some of these cases are clearly going to get there, yes, they'll decide this on the law, but do you think there's going to be a decision there that they must push back for the sake of the judicial branch on some of the things that Trump is doing?
Yes, these people they're not going to commit self-immolation. They know if Mr. Trump can flout court orders, the judiciary then is an ink blot. Why would anyone go to court anymore? Just hire a lobbyist, go to the executive branch. He does whatever he wants to do. That is the end of the rule of law. And that is what we're confronting today. I have cases for James Boasberg. I practice in District of Columbia federal courts all the time. He is not a radical judge. He served as the head of the FISA court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act court. He's kind of as middle road as you can find here. He's been very, very judicious in how he's dealt with this. And this idea is a radical, crazy judge. It is absurd. It would be like calling Mahatma Gandhi, a terrorist or something like that. It's totally contrary to everything that we understand about these judges. And I practice all the time. Sure, I lose cases there. I win cases. But the judges try as best they can to be even-handed. They're human. They're not perfect. But I want to state, and I apologize, I was trying to cut in. The cornerstone of our morality in law is based on the premise that it's better than one or a handful of the guilty go free than that the innocent suffer. That is the cornerstone of Western civilization, and we should never forget that. Yes, it may be true because the system isn't perfect. There's some people who are here that they shouldn't be here, but we are willing to indulge that wrong because we don't want to have any innocent person suffer and be in prison.
Alan, without doubt, some of this is going to end up in the Supreme Court. Some of it already has. If Trump defies the Supreme Court, I mean, it doesn't have any enforcement power of its own. All of the enforcement agencies are run by the US president. I mean, is there a real danger, do you think, of a constitutional crisis in the next 4 years?
I think there is a real danger. And while the Supreme Court does not have an army, it does have options. There is a jail in the bottom of the Supreme Court that we haven't really seen used. And I think, our democracy is young and we're celebrating the vitality of our democracy this year, which is sort of funny with this constitutional crisis heading towards us. But this is a challenge that we've never confronted before, this type of leader. And I think that, it is okay to be a strongman leader, but you just need to follow the process and go through Congress or go through the courts and abide by the court ruling. So if the Supreme Court, which they have, very gingerly, I should also say that 9-0 ruling was very sophisticated in the language they chose to use to nightly judge the president. But one of the things I'd also say is the Trump administration has so many more things they want to accomplish. Is this the fight they need to have right now at this time period over one individual? Because now every deportation case they have, that it has heightened scrutiny, because now we know once you remove somebody, they can't come back in. So that just sort of goes against the use of the Alien Removal Act and every other immigration proceeding he has, because now the burden's going to be much higher because we see that the presidency does not want to work with the courts.
Alan, thank you very much. And thanks to all of our guests today who are joining us, Bruce Fein, Alan Orr and Greg Swenson. Remember, we do this programme every day of the year and you can watch it anytime you want on our app or at our website, aljazeera.com. Comments, contributions and even complaints are welcome. Go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or make your thoughts known on X. Just look for @AJ Inside Story. From me, James Bays, and the rest of the team, please stay safe and well. Bye-bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.